Okay, so we are on 43A4 Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, and we are going to spend the entire day today, the entire morning today, discussing the view of Rabbi Eliezer. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer said as follows. Rabbi Eliezer said that there is a lav, there is a prohibition that a person violates when they eat a mixture of chametz and other foods. So, for example, kutach habavli, or that beer. Which one was it? I don't remember now. Whatever. One of the beers that was a mixture, right? It was really date beer, which was common back then, but they mixed into it a couple, some barley, or you have this kutach habavli, which is this milk dip, which has some breadcrumbs in it. Rabbi Eliezer holds that the punishment is not kares, which is the typical punishment for chametz, but rather the punishment is a lav. It's a negative prohibition. The Gemara is going to try to analyze where does this come from today. Okay, so let's see. Rabbi Eliezer eruva b'lav menale. Where does Rabbi Eliezer learn the source that there is a biblical prohibition? The pasuk says, "Kol machmetzas lo sochelu." You should not eat anything that is leavened. Okay, so says the Gemara. Okay, so from that pasuk, in other words, there's already a pasuk that says don't eat leavened, and then you have another pasuk that says all things which are leavened you shall not eat. And so that second pasuk it comes to include not just regular leavened, but this extra pasuk comes to include things which are leavened, which are mixed together with non-leavened things. Again, like kutach habavli. Ask the Gemara. Ihachi, if that's so, if you're learning it from the pasuk which says kol machmetzas lo sochelu, those words, anything leavened you shall not eat, kares nami l'chayev. Then if those words mean mixtures, then why are you stopping at just saying you're going to have a negative prohibition? You should also have to get kares according to Rabbi Eliezer. Why? You have another pasuk which uses the exact same terminology. Anyone who eats anything which is chametz, it says v'nichrasa. You should get kares. So if you, Rabbi Eliezer, tell me the source is those words, ki kol ochel machmetzes, then there's another word pasuk which says those same exact words, and then it says, and the punishment is kares. So why do you stop at a lav? You should also have to. You should also hold that you should get kares. Answer is the Gemara. Those words, that second pasuk is needed for something else. What's the something else? The Brisa says, had you only had one pasuk that said you get kares for chametz, you would think it's something which is leaven on its own. Okay, so there's certain substances which on their own they make bread, they make things which are rise. How do you know that, let's say you have a substance and then you have a starter, you have a mixture, whatever it's called, a thing. Starter, yeah, but you take from the starter, what's the piece that you take out? Starter? I don't know. The thing. They take from the starter and you mix it to other things. Okay, I'm being very helpful. But the point is that, you put yeast in. In other words, it's not something which is intrinsically going to make chametz. It's something which wouldn't on its own. And then you add something to it and it becomes chametz. How do you know that that's included in the punishment of kares? From that second pasuk, kol machmetzes v'nichrasa comes to tell you that not only things which are chametz intrinsically, but things which also you add some substance to it and triggers them to become leaven, you're also going to get kares for that. Ask the Gemara, Yachi delav nami lachi asa. Okay, so if so, then the prohibition, then you should use, so like this. The Gemara is saying, okay, so if you're telling me kol machmetzes comes to teach me something which is not only intrinsically chametz, but something which you put in and then makes the chametz, so then, and that's what those words mean, then you should say both those psukim, both kol machmetzes lo sochelu and ki kol ochel machmetzes v'nichrasa, both those psukim should be coming to teach us about the same thing. Both of them should come to teach me that when it comes to a substance where I add something to it and it becomes chametz, one pasuk teach me that you're over a lav, okay, and one pasuk come teach me that you get kares. Right? In other words, a step before. The Gemara is telling us, Rabbi Eliezer is saying, okay, the pasuk of kol ochel machmetzes come and teach me that if you have a mixture, you're going to get a lav. And then ki kol ochel machmetzes v'nichrasa comes to teach me that when I mix a substance in, then it's kares. But wait a second, if you're telling me those words, comes teach me that when you mix something in meaning you have a starter, whatever, you take a piece, you take some yeast and you put it into something and it causes it to become chametz, that pasuk come and teach me kares. So then let's go back to that first pasuk, which you, Rabbi Eliezer, want to use, and that pasuk should be used to teach me that there is a lav, there's a negative prohibition. In addition to the kares pasuk, you should have another pasuk to teach me that you're in a violation of a lav when you go ahead and eat something that you put a starter mixed into it to cause it to become chametz. And therefore, both these psukim are not available. So the Gemara says 43a5. Elatam Rabbi Eliezer mi kol. It's not from the word kol ochel machmetzes. It's not the entire pasuk. It's rather the word all. The extra word all. Could have said ochel machmetzes. What does it mean? Ki kol ochel machmetzes. All or anything. That comes to that comes to teach me that that any mixture is going to be aser and it's going to be a lav. Ask the Gemara, Hasam nami hachsiv kol. Okay, but back to the pasuk of kares, it also says kol over there. And if kol comes to include a mixture, meaning kutzach habavli and the beer where you have the mixtures, then there should also be kares, because that same word kol is found in the kares pasuk. So the Gemara says, Ahumi baile. Sorry, you get me on what's going on here? In other words, there's two pasukim that we're dealing with. One pasuk says kol ochel machmetzas. It's an extra pasuk. Shmuel Eliezer is saying us that pasuk is coming to teach me that when you have a mixture, meaning you have kutzach habavli, you take breadcrumbs, you mix it into a whole mixture, you have, or over a lav. Okay, the Gemara says, wait a second, those same words are found by another pasuk, which talk about kares. You say, no, the kares pasuk is coming to teach me of something else. The Gemara says, wait a second, but if the kares pasuk coming to teach me something else, that something else should also be learned from the original pasuk. The Gemara says, you're right. I do need the original pasuk teach me both a lav, a negative prohibition, and kares for that something else. Okay, so let's go back to Eliezer. Where do you learn the idea that if you have kutzach habavli, a mixture of chametz mixed into other things, how do you know that you're going to be over a lav? So he says, it's from the word kol. The word kol is extra. It's not the word the whole pasuk. The whole pasuk is coming to teach me something else. But the word kol is coming to teach me about the mixture. It's coming to teach me about kutzach habavli. The Gemara says, wait, that same word kol is also found in the kares pasuk. So we're back to our original question. Rabbi Eliezer, why are you stopping at a lav? When you eat kutzach habavli, don't tell me it's only going to be a lav. It should be kares as well. So the Gemara says, no. The word kol, the word kol is to teach me that women are not allowed to have chametz. Women are allowed to have chametz. Okay, the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Why would you ever think that women would be allowed to have chametz? Nashim and Rav Yehuda Marav Nafka. Women, we already know from the teaching of Rav Yehuda Marav. Very important teaching. Rav Yehuda Marav. V'chein Tana Dvei Rishmal. Amar Kra Ish O Isha Ki Yasim Kol Chatzos Adam. Pasuk says in the context of a negative prohibition that when a man or a woman commits any of the sins of man. So why does it say when a man or a woman commits any of these sins? Hishva Kasov Isha Leish L'chol Onshin Shematorah, to teach me that whenever you have a negative prohibition, women are going to be included. In other words, we know that there are distinctions made between men and women. Tana Rishmal and Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav. The pasuk over here, by putting together men and women, is teaching me that when it comes to negative prohibitions, there are no distinctions. Negative prohibitions, men and women have the same halachos. So you don't need a special pasuk to tell me, women can't have chametz. You already know that from this global general principle that all negative prohibitions apply to both men and women equally. So Gemara says, Itzrich, no. I still needed to specify it over here by chametz. Why? I still need it. It's 43b1, mem gimel mebez. I would have thought the Torah juxtaposes eating chametz with eating matzah, and kol sheyeshnu mekum echal matzah yeshnu mechav tochel chametz. By putting them side by side, you would say that only those who are obligated to eat matzah, those people can't have chametz. And bahani nashi, and women, hov lesnu mekum echal matzah, since they are not obligated to eat matzah, don't leave yet. Ta'avile mitzvah seishes man grama. You would think, because matzah is a time-bound mitzvah, you only have to eat matzah at night of the first night of Pesach. So therefore you would say women are not included in the mitzvah of eating matzah. Therefore you would say they are also not subject to the prohibition of not eating chametz. In other words, again, since the Torah puts the two side by side, you would say since they don't have an obligation to eat matzah, because it's time-bound, they would therefore not have to eat chametz. Kamash Malan. That's why you need the word kol to teach me, no, women are also obligated or prohibited against eating chametz. Okay, ask the Gemara. And I don't know, points out the Gemara, but the Gemara does something very interesting over here. Now, once you've told us that the word kol tells me that women are not allowed to eat chametz, it's Rabbi Nam Lachilas Matzah. Now we go in the opposite direction. We say, now since we know from the word kol that women are obligated to not eat chametz, they're prohibited against eating chametz because the word kol comes to tell me, in the word kol in the kares pasuk comes to tell me that women are not allowed to have chametz on Pesach, and if they do, they get kares. And now we have that juxtaposition of chametz together with matzah. Before we're going in this direction, saying just like they don't have an obligation for matzah, they don't have an obligation for chametz. Now we're saying, well, since I just learned that they do have an obligation, a prohibition against eating chametz, now we know that they also have an obligation to eat matzah. So women are actually obligated, although it's time-bound, it's one of those exceptions, where women are obligated, right? Sukkos, a little bit esrog, a woman doesn't have to do it. If you want to, you could. Great. But when it comes to matzah, a woman is absolutely obligated to have matzah. And we learn that from the juxtaposition. And as much as they are prohibited, again, women are prohibited against having chametz, the juxtaposition, this placement of them side by side teaches me that they're obligated to have matzah. Okay. Rabbi Lazar, as Rabbi Lazar says, Rabbi Lazar, Nashim chayavas beichlas matzah var Torah. He holds that it is a biblical obligation. Shnemar lo sochel of chametz. It says you shall not eat chametz. Kol sheyeshnu val tochel chametz yeshnu achilas matzah. Anyone who is not allowed to eat chametz is obligated to eat matzah. And nashinami, these women as well, hov yeshnu val tochel chametz, since they are prohibited against eating chametz. Yeshnu makum achal matzah. Therefore, they are obligated to eat matzah. Okay. Ask the Gemara. My chaz is to high call or rebu nashim umapka se ruvo. Emel or ruvo. Okay. So let's go back. I should have written out these psukim on the whiteboard that used to be here. Okay. It's there. Fine. Again, the pasuk says we're right now we're focusing on the second pasuk. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer learned mixture. He learned mixture from kol ochel machmetzes, right? Or whatever. The first pasuk that said anyone who eats chametz, and then there was another pasuk that says kol ochel machmetzes v'nichrasa, telling me that anyone who eats chametz gets kares. And we're saying that second kol is coming to include women in the prohibition. Now the Gemara asks, how do you know to do that? How do you know to include women? The word kol is saying there's some expansion. How do you know to include women, saying that women are prohibited against eating chametz? Maybe what you should have done is included any mixture of chametz, i.e. kutzach habavli and things of that nature, to say that you get kares. In other words, you had two things to add. One was things like kutzach habavli, mixture, chametz, and then you had women in the prohibition. You have one extra word. How do you know what to learn from that extra word? Which one, right? So what gave you the right to include women in the prohibition as opposed to including mixtures in that pasuk, which would have told us that mixtures, the punishment is kares? So the Gemara says, "Mistaber kai ba'ochlin, mar ba'ochlin, kai ba'ochlin, mar b'nechalin." The Gemara says like this: the Torah in that pasuk is saying anyone who eats chametz will get kares. So who's the focus? The focus is on people. The focus is on people there. And if I'm talking about people and I have a reboy, I have an extension, an expansion. So it says everyone is obligated. And there's an extra word over there. I'd say, well, everyone, and even though I would have thought just men, everyone should include more, I'll include women. It doesn't make sense to say everyone and the expansion of that pasuk should include more foods that are going to be aser. You see what's going on, right? By saying everyone who eats chametz, it's talking. The focus is on people, and therefore it makes sense if there's a reboy, if there's some expansion in that verse, it makes sense to include more types of people, i.e., women. It doesn't make sense to include foods. Ask the Gemara. Wait, that's not necessarily true. Maskef lo Rav Nachman avuad Rav Huna v'chol heichad kai ba'ochel amar b'nechalin. Is that so? That wherever we're talking about eaters and there's an inclusion, we only focus on eaters. Vatani we have a brisa about chelev. Chelev are the forbidden fats. You can't eat certain fats found in an animal. The pasuk says kol ochel chelev min behema asher yakrev. And we eat chelev, these forbidden fats from an animal that is brought as an offering. Okay, so the Torah is talking about an offering that is brought in the base of Mikdash, and there's certain fats on that animal that cannot be eaten. But again, those words, ki kol, you see that expansion, inclusion. So had you just had the pasuk on its own, okay, you would think it was just had the pasuk just been written plainly, you would have said it's coming to include all. It's coming to include just animals that are fit for a carbon, because that's what we're talking about over there. Had we know to include animals which are not fit for a carbon, the extra words from the animals is expansive. Okay, including from a balmum, from an animal that has a blemish. How do we know that we're at 43b2? How do you know that if there's an animal that is not consecrated at all, meaning an animal that you and I eat, that's not a consecrated animal, it's just a regular animal? How do we know that's included? Ki kol. Ki kol comes to include all animals. Okay. Now that pasuk is, what is the pasuk saying? Anyone who eats. Anyone who eats. Are we talking about a person or what's eaten? Person, we're talking about the eater or not the eaten. You with me, right? We're talking about the eater, not the eaten. And yet, even though we're talking about the eater, that's the focus. Ki kol ochel, those words come to include more types of prohibited foods, right? So ki kol ochel is talking about, kol ochel is talking about the eaters, and yet we're including things that are eaten. Says the Gemara, Hasam, there's no problem. Hasam's leika ochlin marbe nechalin. Hachadika ochlin l'shavik l'ochlin marbe nechalin. The Gemara says no, big difference. By chelev, we're talking about a prohibition. A prohibition is already, as we learned a moment ago, whenever there's a prohibition, it includes what? Everybody, men and women, right? So you have an expansive verse, which comes to say include more. Well, there's nothing else to include, because you already included men and women, so I'm just going to leave it, okay? So I have to say, so I have an expansive verse, I don't leave it, sorry. I have an expansive verse, it's comes to include more prohibited things, more things that are eaten, because there are no more eaters to prohibit. They're already prohibited, right? But when we come back to chametz and matzah, there, the pasuk, we start off, it says, anyone who eats chametz, and there are more eaters available to include in that prohibition, i.e. women. So it doesn't make sense to jump over the women and start including more foods before you include more eaters, and therefore there's no contradiction. In one place we've already exhausted all eater possibilities, and therefore we jump to more eatin, i.e. chulin, more foods that could be aser, but over here by chametz and matzah, we had more eaters to include, i.e. women, and therefore we are going to include them before we include the ta'aroves, again, the mixture of chametz is not going to be included. So again, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Tana, what we're saying over here is that the first pasuk, kol ochel, is coming to teach me that a mixture of chametz, and things of that nature are going to have a lav. There's another pasuk that speaks about kares that pasuk is not going to teach me that there's kares by a mixture. Rather, the pasuk of kares, the expansiveness over there comes to include women in the prohibition that women who eat chametz are going to also get kares if they do so on Pesach. Okay, says the Gemara further. Rabbanan, deleislu eir of ki kol lo darshi. The rabbis who obviously so let's go back to the original verse. Rabbi Eliezer learns from the original verse from the word kol that it comes to include mixtures. The rabbis disagree. They said there's no prohibition. That means they reject this learning of kol to come to include things, right? In other words, right? Remember, let's go back originally. The Rabbi Eliezer said, a mixture, you're going to get a lav. The rabbi said you get nothing. That means they reject the limud of kol. And therefore, they have the word kol both in the first verse, doesn't come to include a mixture. But let's go to the second verse. What did we learn from the word kol in the second verse? The kares verse. We came to learn that women are going to get kares for eating chametz. But if the rabbis reject the learning of kol, right, then they have no verse available to teach me that women are going to be where do we know that women are prohibited against eating chametz? They should be able to eat chametz all Pesach long. Wouldn't that be cool? Okay, says Gemara, no, sorry. Call lo darshi, ki call darshi. In the first verse it says call, that they don't learn. But the second verse, which talks about kares and chametz, says ki call, 2 extra words that they learn. It says the Gemara, Elazar ema call l'rabbis zanashim, ki call l'rabbis ruvo. Okay, so let's go back to Rabbi Eliezer. He said, so if why doesn't he do the same thing? He should learn from call to include women, and the extra word ki call he should come to include the mixture, and so you get kares there. So it says the Gemara, "V'chitema ki kol Rabbi Eliezer l'darish." Maybe you want to tell me that Rabbi Eliezer does not learn this ki kol drasha in general. V'atanya, that's not true. We see explicitly he does, because the pasuk says about karbanos, about mincha offerings. It says "Sa'ar bal taksiru." You should not burn on the altar leaven. Okay, ainli elakulo. I would think that an offering of leaven is forbidden if all of it is leaven. Mixaso minayin, let's you only have a portion of it which is leaven. The rest of it is not chametz. Tamalomer kol. A ruba minayin. How do we know that if I have something on the mizbeach which is a mixture of chametz and not chametz, and the leaven is mixed in indistinguishably, like kutzach, tamalomer ki kol. Okay, so the pasuk says ki kol. That's the end of the brisa. Says the Gemara, man shamas leidarish kol. Who is the one in general who learns the word kol alone? Who is the one? The rabbis reject the kol. Who does? Rabbi Eliezer. So we know Rabbi Eliezer is the author of this brisa. And Rabbi Eliezer, turn to page 43b1, v'kodarish ki kol. And yet in the same brisa, which is talking about something else, he also learns the word ki kol. So we see Rabbi Eliezer does learn the word ki kol, and therefore the Gemara is saying this. Again, let's go back to the question. Why doesn't Rabbi Eliezer say like this? The second pasuk of ki kol ochel machmetzes v'nichrasa, which teach me about kares. We know that he uses kol to teach me that women are going to be prohibited against eating chametz. They get kares if they do. But the word ki kol, he should learn to also include a mixture of chametz. And don't tell me that he doesn't learn ki kol, right? Because maybe he says, ki kol is the same thing as kol. We know he doesn't. We know he learns ki kol because we just had a brisa, which we just established is Rabbi Eliezer, and he does learn the words ki kol. And therefore, he should also say that a mixture of chametz should be, you should get kares for. The Gemara says kasha. We don't have a good answer for that, and we leave it at that. And now we know Rabbi Eliezer's view, and we're going to pick up, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great day.